I can still feel the weight of my phone in my hand that night, the soft glow of the screen illuminating Greg's name when he called. His voice sounded different, almost tender, which made me pause mid-sip of my chamomile tea. "Mom, are you busy?" he asked. And there was a gentle warmth under his words that I hadn't heard in years. Later, I reread the text from Meline. "We want you here for Thanksgiving," followed by a heart emoji. It was so simple and yet so profound, 3 words that carried the promise of belonging. My heart pounded with a mixture of disbelief and joy, as if I were hearing for the first time an invitation written just for me. I set the mug aside, my fingers trembling slightly. It had been so long since anyone had asked me to come without an undertone of obligation, no birthdays to attend, no bills to remind me of their love. This felt different. It felt like a door crack opening after years of being left ajar. I stared out the kitchen window at the bare branches of the maple tree and let the quiet of the night settle around me, imagining the scene that awaited, laughter echoing around a well-laid table, the warmth of the oven still lingering in the air, the soft glow of candles reflecting off every set of loving eyes. Excitement fluttered in my chest, warm and insistent. By sunrise, I was already at my computer scouring airline websites for the best non-stop flight. I found one at a decent price, even with the extra legroom fee, and clicked book with a confidence I hadn't felt in ages. I paid the additional $12 for seat 14A, reasoning that if I was traveling halfway across the country, I deserved at least a little extra comfort. My mother used to say that small luxuries were the cherries on top of life's modest cake, and I decided it was time I sampled them again. Packing was its own ceremony. I lined up my belongings on the bed, my favorite pie dish oval ceramic painted with tiny sunflowers, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. A new navy blue cardigan, soft and draping perfectly at the hips. The cardigan I'd bought last winter in case this one didn't fit the mood. Familiar sweaters for layering. A pair of black shoes with a tiny, elegant heel that made me feel poised. I added a set of travel-sized toiletries, my Bridge Club book that I never got around to reading, and a small stack of handwritten recipe cards tied with a ribbon just in case I wanted to make something special for someone who actually wanted it. Each item slipped into my suitcase like a memory waiting to be lived again. As I zipped up the case, I realized I hadn't told a soul. Certainly not my bridge group, who would pepper me with questions, and not my neighbor Doris, who'd insist on knitting me a scarf for every possible weather scenario. Part of me didn't want to jinx it by speaking it aloud, didn't want the magic to vanish before I even arrived. So I tucked the phone into my pocket, gave the suitcase a final pat as if to reassure it, and flipped off the bedroom light. Sleep that night was a restless procession of dreams, me walking through crowded terminals, faces turning toward me with relief. Me carving that turkey with practiced grace and hearing genuine laughter. Me holding a slice of pie aloft in a toast, rings glinting on my fingers as everyone cheered my arrival. Morning came too soon. I dressed in layers, a simple blouse, the navy cardigan, and a coat I could shed once the plane warmed up. The drive to the airport was quiet, the streets still damp with overnight frost. At the terminal, I joined the river of travelers, some rushing, some ambling children clutching backpacks, couples dragging duffels. My heart kept nudging my ribs, reminding me I was here by choice, welcomed. At the check-in counter, I felt an unexpected surge of pride as the attendant handed me my boarding pass, seat 14A. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." On the plane, I settled into my seat with a small exhalation of relief. The extra 2 inches of legroom felt like a gift, each flex of my ankle a reminder that I belonged somewhere beyond these narrow confines. I gazed out the window as we taxied the sun low and golden over the city skyline, painting everything in hope. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engines lull me into a rare peace, thinking of the pie I would bake, perhaps a pumpkin one this year, with whipped cream if my hands steadied, and the pleasure in anticipating someone else's delight. All around me, passengers arranged pillows and albums and tablets. Nobody knew my story, But in that moment, I felt intimately connected to each soul on board, each of us traveling not just across miles, but toward our own versions of home. My thoughts drifted to the soft silence of my living room, to the piano in the corner gathering dust, to the ghost of laughter that waited to be summoned back into these walls. I wondered how it would feel to walk through the front door of my son's house, to place that pie dish on their countertop, to hear Meline say, "Grandma, you made it," and to believe it in my bones. When the flight landed, I smoothed my skirt and picked up my bag as if it contained not just clothes and dishes, but every ounce of belonging I had stored away. My heart thrummed at the thought of stepping into arrival, standing beneath that bright sign, and finally hearing the words, "There she is." No matter what happened after I knew I had seized this moment for myself. I had answered their call, and more importantly, I had answered my own. As I rolled my suitcase toward the gate, I carried with me a tingle of genuine excitement, and for the first time in years, a profound sense that this invitation was more than polite words spoken into a phone. It was an affirmation that I was at last truly wanted. I pushed through the cabin door into the brilliant strip of sunlight lining the terminal entrance and felt my chest tighten. The wheels of my suitcase clicked against the linoleum floor as I followed the signs to Gate 3A, where I'd been told to wait. My coat was folded neatly over my arm, but my heartbeat felt anything but tidy. I rounded a corner, and there it was, the arrival sign. Bold white letters against green, an unspoken promise that someone would be standing beneath it, watching for me. Instead, I found a river of strangers. Parents swept toddlers into their arms, bridesmaids held bouquets aloft, and college kids held homemade posters in looping cursive. A man in a pressed suit snapped his wife's photo beside a cluster of balloons shaped like hearts. A young woman in roller bags rushed forward to greet a soldier in uniform, tears spilling down her cheeks. Everywhere I looked, people were being claimed. I stood alone, an extra passenger floating in midair. Time felt elastic, 42 minutes stretching into an hour. I checked my watch, then my phone. No missed calls, no text messages. My son's insistence that we'll be right there felt suddenly quaint, like the echo of a conversation in an empty room. My coat grew heavier with each passing minute, as though it carried every ounce of my hope. I hesitated to drape it over the bench beside me, afraid that if I sat down, I might decide I'd waited long enough. So I remained upright, shoulders squared, pretending any moment now my family would come around the corner, wide smiles and apologetic laughter in tow. I tried hard to believe they were simply caught up in traffic, or that the carousel was slower than usual, or that someone had sent the wrong gate number. But every time I lifted my gaze, I saw them, families, collapsing into embraces, camera flashes, marking each joyful reunion. Each one hammered the same message into my heart: there was no space for me here. A young mother caught my eye and offered a sympathetic smile before guiding her toddlers toward a purple minivan. I returned a tight nod, the kind of acknowledgement strangers share when they recognize a fellow human in a moment of vulnerability. Her kindness felt warm, like a sidelong blessing. I thought of all the years I'd arrived on doorsteps and porches, carrying casseroles and pies, and my unwavering smile, only to watch gratitude slip through clenched teeth or vanish into distracted glances at smartphones. I thought of birthdays, when I'd cake the tablecloth and sing happy birthday so earnestly my voice shook, and no one had bothered to pick up the phone that morning. I thought of yesterday when I packed my cardigan and my pie dish, as though stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. Now I stood in that dream's most exposed moment, and I felt every thread fray into silence. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I almost leapt to answer, relief flooding me, before remembering it was just a social media notification. I peeked at the preview, an engagement announcement from someone I'd barely known in high school, and my throat curved with bitterness. Even here, surrounded by celebrations, I felt collateral damage, the unwanted viewer who skimmed everyone else's joy but had no part in it. I tucked the phone away and cleared my throat, reminding myself that I was more than a passive observer in the theater of other people's lives. I began to walk slow, circular laps along the curbside, past cab signs and shuttle stations, breathing in the cold Midwestern air that smelled faintly of diesel and pretzel carts. Each inhale brought a sting, as though the world were asking, "What now?" I didn't have an answer. My suitcase rattled behind me with every turn, the sound echoing like distant laughter. I passed a family loading groceries into a waiting SUV, the mother pressing a hot chocolate into her elderly mother's gloved hands. I watched a teenager hoist her grandmother into the passenger seat, then lean into the window for one more kiss on the cheek. Those scenes, so ordinary and profound, should have been mine. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stood under a flickering lamp, eyes closed, recalling the softness of that late-night invitation. "We want you here for Thanksgiving." I whispered the words to the heavy air, as if calling them back, willing them to be true. When I opened my eyes, the lamp's glow looked colder, more indifferent. 20 more minutes. I checked the time again, 4:15 p.m. The sun hovered low, a pale disk behind gathering clouds. Dinner would start soon, my mind whispered. They must have begun without me. The thought could have broken me, but instead it lit something else, an ember of resolve I hadn't known lay buried in decades of habit. I shifted my weight, realizing I didn't have to stand here until memory forced me to leave. I could choose to move on. My phone buzzed again. A good morning meme from my bridge club, nothing to do with me today. That small intrusion of laughter reminded me I had a world beyond this curb, beyond any table that would not make room. I stared at the wallpaper of my lock screen, my husband's hand in mine decades ago, standing on our wedding dock, and remembered I had built a life full of moments that mattered. I could claim those memories now, rather than wait for a misguided promise of belonging. I wheeled my suitcase away from the curb, the wheels clicking in steady rhythm. Each turn a step away from the ache and towards something I could name authentic. I passed Tina's diner, the neon sign sputtering with warmth, and paused suddenly, hungry for something real to fill me. But I kept walking, determined to find my own nourishment, wherever it might be. As I moved further from the airport's pulsing heart, the roar of traffic gave way to quieter streets lined with shuttered shops and the faint smell of late-season leaves. My pace slowed, and I found myself thinking not of who I'd expected to greet me, but of what I needed for myself, a seat at a table where my welcome wasn't conditional, where my company was a gift, not an afterthought. By the time I reached the intersection where the road divided toward downtown, I was no longer trembling. My shoulders had lowered, and the ache in my chest had softened into a steady hum of clarity. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with cool air, and exhaled a long, deliberate sigh. The airport was behind me, the place where they forgot me, and ahead lay whatever I chose next. I didn't know yet whether that would be a diner booth, a cafe corner, or the quiet of my own living room. But in that moment, I knew one thing: I would not return to a gate convinced they would find me. Instead, I walked away, carrying my coat and my cardigan and my pie dish, every piece of softness I possessed, knowing I would find a place that truly wanted me. And with each click of my suitcase wheels, I felt lighter, less like a misplaced package and more like someone reclaiming her own journey. My phone buzzed against my thigh, an almost imperceptible vibration in the chill of that late afternoon air. I fished it out more from habit than hope and saw a notification from my daughter-in-law's social media, a new post. My thumb hovered a moment before I tapped it, bracing for another fleeting reassurance. What I saw instead felt like a punch delivered softly so that my chest didn't shatter, but simply went numb. There was Greg standing tall in the navy sweater I'd sent him last winter, his arm draped casually around Meline's shoulders. Her smile was brilliant sunlight over water, and the kids, Elliot and Ruby, perched on either side, beamed with excitement. In front of them, a long wooden table groaned under the weight of candied yams, platters of turkey bowls of mashed potatoes, and glaringly, a perfectly round pumpkin pie that wasn't mine. They were holding up wine glasses in a toast, heads tilted toward the camera, as though the photographer had just cried out, "Smile." The caption read, "Full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." No one stood or sat at the head of that table. No hand reached out to fill the empty chair. My heart didn't explode into tears. Oddly, I didn't even feel the familiar sting of betrayal. Instead, a curious calm settled over me, as if I'd stepped out of a dream to find the world indifferent to my presence. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the screen still reflecting that joyful scene. The curb where I'd waited, the place I'd imagined would be alive with apologies and relief, felt suddenly foreign. I could have remained there, eyes fixed on that spot, convinced that after a moment of embarrassment, they'd come racing around the corner. But something in me had changed. That post was their version of the story, and it was a story from which I had been erased. I'd spent decades smoothing over absences, accepting half-hearted calls and last-minute invitations as proof that I mattered. Today, the absence felt deliberate, and I could no longer pretend it was anything but. I inhaled deeply, the cold air filling my lungs with resolve. I zipped up my coat a little higher and picked up my wheeled suitcase by the handle, feeling the reassuring click of its joints. Instead of looking up again toward the terminal doors, I let my gaze settle on the horizon of the airport parking lot, flat gray pavement stretching toward unknown streets. In that vast expanse, I saw possibility a path forward beyond the stale script I'd been handed. As I rolled my bag away from the curb, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Meline, most likely an explanation already crafted and waiting to be read. But I didn't check. My silence would speak louder than any apology. With each step, the clamor of arrivals receded behind me, replaced by the scuff of my suitcase wheels and the distant hum of engines. I felt aware of every footprint, every choice, as if each one marked my exit from a role I'd long outgrown. My thoughts drifted to the years I had spent filling spaces, chairs at holiday tables, volunteer hours at the community center, afternoons baking dozens of cookies for school fundraisers. I had thought generosity was my purpose, my proof of love. But generosity unreturned is simply a vacuum waiting to be filled by someone else's need. At that moment, I realized I was done being the hole in someone's frame, the extra note in their family song. The airport perimeter gave way to service roads lined with shuttered businesses and anonymous chain restaurants. The neon signs were dark now, but I saw their shapes etched against the dull sky as I passed. A cold wind swooped down the road, tugging at my cardigan, whispering that I belonged here, not beneath a blinking arrival sign, but on my own path. I adjusted my grip on the phone in my pocket, willing myself not to check again. Every buzz I ignored was a victory. Every unanswered call, a declaration that I would no longer respond to distractions from my own life. I rounded a corner and found myself in front of a small coffee kiosk, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Yet something held me back, something fierce that said, "Not yet." I was neither hungry nor thirsty for the comforts I'd so carefully planned. Instead, I wanted to savor the rawness of this moment, the ache of exclusion, the clarity of self-worth emerging from it. I let the distance between me and that table grow step by step until it felt like a canyon I would never cross for them again. Half a mile out, the airport buildings gave way to ordinary streets. Shrubs planted in concrete medians wilted against the frost. Parked cars glinted under street lamps. Here, my suitcase wheels muted their click and slid more softly against the worn asphalt. Silence enveloped me, not as loneliness, but as a canvas, empty, yes, but ready for whatever I chose to paint. My mind turned to Emma, my granddaughter, who lived 3 states away, yet had been the one to send me pictures of her new nursing scrubs, to ask for my cornbread stuffing recipe, to remind me that I was someone's safe place. In that moment, I craved her voice more than any family gathering. I imagined her surprise if I called now, unannounced, to invite her into my journey. She'd listen without obligation, without letting me shrink into the background. But I held the phone still, letting the screen stay dark against my palm. I didn't need another invitation. I had extended one to myself. It glowed brighter than any typo-laden family text message, brighter than the flickering arrival sign that had once drawn me in with false hope. The wind picked up, lifting stray leaves into eddies. The sky had turned the shade of pewter, heavy with unspoken possibilities. I squared my shoulders, feeling the weight shift from my heart to my heels. I had a suitcase full of new cardigans, a pie dish I never actually baked with, and a mind finally awake to the difference between being needed and being wanted. That distinction felt like oxygen I'd been deprived of for far too long. I passed a closed diner with neon letters that blinked on and off, open, closed, open, as though indecisive about their own welcome. I put a hand on the windowsill, peering through the condensation, and saw empty booths and a counter lined with red stools. I could hear the imagined clatter of plates and the hum of conversation drifting through the glass. But still I kept walking. At a side street lined with maples stripped bare of leaves, I slowed. The world around me felt spacious, no longer overshadowed by expectations or disappointments. I took one final breath of that November air, breathed out the last of my old beliefs, and let the door of my past click shut behind me. I lifted my chin and started down the street toward whatever came next. No tears, no pleas, just the quiet resolve that I was moving on. The social media image of that Thanksgiving table might have marked the end of one story, but it was the seed of another. And as the lights of the airport faded in my rear view, I felt a new kind of invitation whisper in my ear, "Come as you are, and create your own table." The cold air bit through my coat as I stepped off the shuttle and onto the deserted curb, my suitcase wheels rattling against the cracked pavement. Above me, the sky was a blank sheet of pewter, dull and uninviting, until a flicker of neon cut through the gloom. Tina's Diner. 3 bright letters glowed in warm yellow and red, painting the sidewalk, and promise. I paused for a moment, letting the hum of the sign grow louder than the ache in my chest. Something about the sincerity of neon called to me, and I pushed open the door, stepping into a world that smelled of grease and cinnamon and the quiet hum of conversation. Inside the diner was a snapshot of Americana vinyl booths lined one wall, their red cushions cracked and softened by decades of backs leaning into conversation. The counter stretched the length of the room, topped with stainless steel that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Behind it, battered stools beckoned circular seats perched on metal springs that sighed when you sat down. I chose one at the far end, where the window framed a view of empty parking spaces and the dull glow of street lamps. My suitcase stood beside me like a loyal dog, waiting patiently for my next move. A waitress appeared almost immediately, her short ponytail bobbing as she approached. She wore a faded blue uniform apron dusted with flour, and when she spoke, her voice was a soft southern drawl. "Happy Thanksgiving, hon," she said, her eyes crinkling in genuine warmth. I smiled back, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Same to you," I replied, sliding onto the stool and feeling the vinyl warm beneath me. I pushed my coat aside and unfolded the simple paper menu she handed me, but I already knew what I wanted. "Pumpkin pie and a strong tea, please," I told her, and she nodded as though I'd ordered a daily special. She rattled the menu for effect and called back to the cook, her voice carrying a ribbed comfort. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and watched the door swing gently behind the next patron, a man in a UPS jacket shrugging off his gloves as he sat down 2 stools away. The diner's soundtrack was a low tapestry of clinking dishes, hushed chatter, and the occasional hiss of the grill. When she returned, the tea arrived first, a steaming mug that painted the inside of my hands with warmth, the aroma sharp and earthy. I wrapped both palms around it and closed my eyes for a moment, dunking into the heat as though it were consolation itself. A slice of pumpkin pie followed its crust, golden and tender, a dollop of whipped cream perched on top like a slow-motion snowfall. I counted the seconds before my fork reached it, 1, 2, 3, and then I plunged in. The first bite was a revelation. Spices swirling across my tongue. Cinnamon, nutmeg. A whisper of clove balanced by the smooth sweetness of the pumpkin filling. The crust yielded softly, flaking in buttery threads that scattered across the plate. I chewed slowly, allowing each morsel to imprint itself in memory. My eyes drifted to the window where the November light had mellowed into early dusk, and for the first time since I'd left home, I felt a curious lightness in my chest. This pie wasn't baked for anyone else. It was mine. I sipped my tea again, savoring the contrast of bitter leaf and sweet filling. Across the counter, the UPS driver lifted his mug in a quiet salute before taking a drink. We were strangers, but I felt a kinship in that unspoken gesture. Two travelers pausing in the middle of life's journey, finding solace in pumpkin and tea. He offered a tired smile, and I nodded in return, as though we understood that sometimes the simplest comforts speak louder than the grandest gestures. In the hush, I remembered the countless times I'd set a table for family, smoothing tablecloth edges and arranging silverware, just so only to watch chairs left empty or plates cleared without comment. I recalled the weight of pies boxed and broken silently in the trunk of my car as I waited for a last-minute phone call that never came. But here at this diner counter, none of that history mattered. I was not an afterthought or a placeholder. I was simply a person enjoying a moment of warmth and flavor, no explanations required. A plate with a second slice of pie appeared unexpectedly, sliding into view before I could ask. The waitress winked, her eyes warm with a conspiratorial joy. On the house, she said softly, "Best decision you'll make all day." My throat tightened, and I nodded, wordless gratitude shining between us. I savored the second slice, slowly letting the quiet friendship of a stranger's kindness fill the hollow spaces left by neglect. When I finally pushed back from the counter, the plate empty and the mug dry, I felt a surge of clarity. I paid the bill, modest, considering the generosity I'd received, and tacked a $1 tip under my cup. Outside, the neon sign still blinked its invitation, but I no longer needed it. I had found a refuge that didn't require memories of invitations or apologies. It was simply there, willing to feed me pie and tea when I needed it most. The chill of the evening air returned as I stepped back onto the pavement, but I held my coat close with a new kind of comfort. I rolled my suitcase forward, but this time my steps felt lighter, guided by a sense of ownership over my own story. Tina's Diner had offered me more than pie. It had reminded me that I could claim joy without waiting for someone else's permission. And as I walked away, I carried with me the lingering warmth of that slice of freedom, ready to discover where the next forkful might lead. By the time I pushed open the door to the Valley Inn, I felt the weight of the day in every bone. The neon vacancy sign flickered once, as if winking a half-hearted welcome to a place chosen not for charm, but for shelter. Inside the lobby smelled of stale coffee and the one fluorescent bulb that never quite warmed up. A man behind the counter glanced up from a tiny TV playing an afternoon football game. His eyes drifted from the screen to me, then back again, as though unsure why I'd arrived looking so resolute. "Room for one night?" he asked without enthusiasm. I nodded and whispered, "Just one night." He handed me a flimsy key on a peeling plastic ring and a slip of paper with the rate scrawled in black marker. I slipped a bill into his outstretched hand, enough to cover the room and a little extra, then turned toward the door. The sound of it shutting behind me felt definitive, like an exclamation point at the end of a long sentence. Room 114 was exactly what the brochure promised: 4 walls painted in uninspired beige, a creaky bedspread in muted browns, and a TV perched on a low dresser that looked older than both my children. The carpet had a pattern that tried and failed to disguise years of life tracked in from outside. But it was warm, surprisingly warm, and that felt like a kindness I'd learned to accept gratefully. I set my suitcase on the floor and slid off my shoes, flexing sore feet that had carried me farther than usual. My cardigan smelled faintly of airport coffee, and the diner's pumpkin spice evidence of a day spent chasing a promise only I believed in. My phone buzzed against the nightstand, 3 calls from Greg, 2 from Eileen, and a flurry of texts I didn't bother to read. My impulse to respond had thinned into a wary stillness. Instead, I reached for the notebook I always kept tucked in my bag, the one with half-finished shopping lists and stray thoughts I jotted down but never shared. The little desk beneath the window offered me a slanted surface and a single lamp whose yellow glow dripped across the page. I flipped past doodles of recipes and grocery items until I found a fresh sheet. The notebook felt alive under my palm pages, whispering encouragement. I uncapped my pen and, without pause, wrote in large, uneven letters, I am not spare. I am not extra. Even as I wrote, the words tasted unfamiliar, sharp, almost metallic. But they rang true. Beneath them, I underlined each sentence twice, my pen digging into the paper like carving stone. The harder I pressed, the clearer I became. No more placeholders. No more waiting in gates that led nowhere. No more second-class invitations. I reread the sentences aloud in a hushed tone. I am not spare. I am not extra. The silence in the room seemed to lean in and listen, a kind of audience I'd never had before. I closed my eyes, picturing the Thanksgiving post that had marked my absence, letting the memory settle rather than sting. Then I opened them again and drew a boundary around the words, boxing them in like a shield. My phone buzzed again. I let it lie face down, vibrations stirring the table but no longer commanding my attention. Earlier, I might have reached for it, phone pressed to my ear, ready to explain, to plead, to apologize for my own existence. Now I felt something stronger, a resistance to that reflex, a refusal to make my worth contingent on someone else's guilt. I rose from the desk and paced to the window, pulling aside the thin curtain to peer into the parking lot. A lone car idled under the street lamp, its engine humming a steady lullaby. Beyond the freeway, lights flickered like a distant skyline. I inhaled the crisp night air rushing through the gap in the frame, tasting freedom on my tongue. The motel offered no frills, but it provided space to be quiet, to think, and to name my own value. Back at the desk, I sipped water from the plastic cup the clerk had given me at check-in. I noticed the condensation beading on the outside, mirroring the beads of sweat I felt at my hairline. My head throbbed just slightly, an echo of the day's emotional turbulence. I closed my eyes briefly and let my fingers trace the notebook's spiral. Each coil reminding me of the rounds I'd walked at the airport circles of hope that never returned my gaze. Finding a fresh page, I wrote the words again in smaller letters, as though practicing a new mantra, not spare, not extra. This time, I repeated them 5 times, letting the rhythm hammer them into my mind. With each repetition, I felt a small knot in my chest, a knot itself, loosening the ache left by my son's empty promises. I paused, pen hovering. My thoughts drifted to Emma, my granddaughter, the one who called just to share pictures of her nursing scrubs or to ask for my cornbread recipe. She had never made me wait. Her invitations had always been gifts given freely with neither request nor condition. I found myself smiling at the memory of her laughter, echoing through the phone, bright as sunlight through a window. I closed my eyes and murmured her name, imagining her reading those words, I am not spare. I'm not extra. I hoped she would understand how vital it was for me to say them first. The phone buzzed again, the vibration shaking the table. I looked at it, a rectangle of light begging for my attention. But I wasn't anyone's helpline or emergency contact anymore. I had no duty to fill the silence left by people who had chosen not to hear me. So I turned the phone off, pressing the power button until the screen went dark. The desk lamp remained the only glow, casting soft shadows around me. I untucked my cardigan and wrapped it around my shoulders, closing the front with a single button. It felt like donning armor, a soft barrier against the world's indifference. Then I took a deep breath and laid the notebook flat, pen beside it, ready to write again if I needed to. but in that quiet moment I realized I had said enough for one night. I moved to the edge of the bed and sat down, stretching my legs out on the rumpled sheets. The mattress gave a small, tired groan under my weight, as though relieved to support me. I ran my fingers over the rough coverlet, feeling its worn texture, and let my thoughts drift without judgment. Outside, a distant siren echoed once, then faded into the night. Somewhere a radiator kicked on its steady clank, marking time. The room settled into its own hush, a lullaby of solitude that felt restorative rather than lonely. I lay back, tucking my feet over the edge of the mattress, and stared up at the crack in the ceiling, an imperfection running like a river I could follow with my eyes. It reminded me that none of us are flawless, but that our cracks let the light in. I closed my eyes and let the day's lessons seep into me. I envisioned returning home, not to Greg's house, not to any family gathering, but to my own house, where lavender still scented the hallway and the radiator warmed the floors. I imagined greeting my porch light as though it were an old friend welcoming me back, not out of habit, but out of genuine care. When I drifted toward sleep, it wasn't because I was defeated, but because I was whole. My chest felt calm, and the mantra I had written echoed softly in my mind. I am not spare. I am not extra. I am not spare. I am not extra. And in that budget motel room, beneath a single lamp and a window that framed a slice of night sky, I found something I'd been seeking all along, the clarity to know that I belonged to myself first, and that was enough. I climbed the front steps of my home with a quiet determination, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot like distant applause. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old pine, comforting reminders of the life I'd built beyond expectations. I set my suitcase down by the door and paused, hand resting on the doorknob as if bracing myself for what lay ahead. Until today, I'd avoided the file cabinet in the hallway, its drawers weighted with years of receipts and reminders of my generosity. Now it beckoned, and I knew I had to open it. The first drawer yielded a rainbow of tabbed folders: Greg, Ruby, Elliot, Meline, holiday, gifts, tuition, emergency fund. Each label whispered a story: the wallet I'd sent Greg for his 40th birthday, the ballet shoes for Ruby's recital, the tuition check for Elliot's sophomore year. I pulled out the Greg folder first. It bulged with checks I'd written over the years: mortgage co-signings, car repairs. I'd quietly covered tuition payments I fronted when he'd been between jobs. I flipped through the photocopied bank slips and gas station receipts, each one a testament to my faith in him, to my belief that my love could be measured in dollars. Beneath those were emails from Meline thanking me for bouquets of flowers after her surgery, gift cards when her job dissolved, last-minute checks when the car broke down. I paused at a faded note. "Can you help with Emma's nursing school fee?" I'd paid that too. No question asked. My chest tightened, not with guilt or shame, but with an odd sense of revelation. These papers weren't just paper, they were the ledger of my life, spent pouring myself out line by line from my own savings. I slid the Greg folder back and opened the one marked holiday gifts. Inside were receipts for dozens of Christmas turkeys, Easter baskets, Mother's Day brunches. I'd hosted even a summer camp fee for Elliot when Meline said her work schedule couldn't cover it. I remembered the sacrifices I'd made, canceling my bridge club dinners, skipping my own doctor appointments so I could make sure they never felt the pinch of hardship. I always told myself it was my purpose, that a mother's love was best expressed through giving. But now I saw it differently. I'd subsidized their lives. And in return, I'd built invisible walls around myself. Walls they never bothered to climb. I carried the folders to my desk and stacked them neatly. My purse was still on the table, its loose change rattling as I emptied it into a bowl. I hadn't touched my own savings accounts in years. Everything discretionary had gone to my family. I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting the silence of the empty house wash over me. It wasn't quite peaceful, but it was honest. No more half-truths, no more self-forgiveness for obligations I hadn't chosen. The next morning, I found myself at the sliding doors of the local bank. I hadn't been here in months, too busy wiring money, too busy avoiding the conversations that might expose my depletion. But today, I walked in with my head held high. The bank's lobby smelled of polished wood and air conditioning. A nervous line formed at the teller windows, and the soft ping of the ATM alerted arrivals and departures like a heartbeat. I approached the counter and handed my card to the teller, a young woman with kind eyes who greeted me with customer service cheer. "Good morning, Mrs. Wexler. How can I help you today?" I cleared my throat, steadying my voice. "I'd like to speak with someone about my automatic transfers," I said. Her brow lifted slightly as if she'd heard this only a handful of times. "Of course. If you'll have a seat, our account manager, Miss Natalie, will be right with you." I nodded and took a seat in the plush chair near the window. Through the glass, I watched a mother showing her daughter how to fill out a deposit slip, an ordinary scene of financial teaching that suddenly felt poignant. I remembered teaching my own children to balance a checkbook, to mind every dollar, to save for rainy days. Ironically, I'd forgotten to save for my own. Miss Natalie arrived promptly, clipboard in hand, her professional demeanor softened by a warm smile. She led me to a glass-walled office, quiet except for the low hum of a printer. She gestured to a chair, and I sat waiting for the inevitable question. "So, Mrs. Wexler," she began scanning her screen. "I see several recurring transfers to your daughter-in-law, your son, and various tuition and maintenance categories. What can I do for you today?" My throat felt dry. I took a breath. "I'd like to suspend all family-related automatic transfers," I said, watching her expression shift. She blinked, paused, then asked gently, "Would you like to keep the charitable contributions?" I nodded firmly. "Yes, charities remain. Everything else stops." There was a flicker of concern in her eyes. "May I ask why she ventured?" I met her gaze, felt my pulse slow. "No more explanations." I said each word deliberate. Her lips parted, but she nodded, respecting my boundary. She tapped at her keyboard fingers, dancing over the keys as she processed the changes. I watched her face, polite curiosity giving way to acceptance. When she finished, she printed a summary and slid it across the desk. "Everything's been suspended," she said quietly. "Thank you," I replied, reaching for the paper. It felt weighty in my hand, like I held my newfound autonomy by its edges. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and turned to leave. But as I reached the door, she hesitated. "Mrs. Wexler," she called. I paused in the doorway. "There's also a power of attorney on file for Gregory Wexler. Would you like to revoke that as well?" she asked, offering me a choice that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I nodded. "Yes. Please revoke it." Relief bloomed across her features as she made a note. "Consider it done," she assured me. Outside, the crisp air felt invigorating, carrying away the heaviness I'd carried for decades. I walked to my car, every step lighter than the one before. The city hummed around me, people commuting, storefronts, opening life unfolding as it always had. But something within me had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the unsung benefactor, the family ATM whose value was measured in dollar signs. I had drawn a line in the financial sands and declared it my own boundary. Back at home, I filed the bank summary beside the folders I'd cleared out yesterday. Seeing the printout next to the bulging receipts created a stark contrast. On one side, years of unacknowledged giving. On the other, a blank space where those obligations once lived. I sat at my desk and stared at that empty space, letting the silence speak. No apologies, no guilt, just clarity. I remembered the first time I realized love wasn't always shown in gifts. It was when Greg was 10, standing at the sink after school with a split lip from a playground scuffle. I knelt beside him and told him it was okay to feel pain, that tears didn't weaken you. He looked at me with wide, honest eyes, and in that moment, I understood that presence mattered more than provision. I hadn't just given money. I had withheld myself from my own needs, convinced that my worth lay in my ability to fix theirs. Today, I fixed it for myself. I reached for my notebook and wrote a new line beneath the mantras I'd inked in the motel room. My value is not measured by my generosity. I underlined it 3 times. The page trembled under my pen, and I felt a rush of affirmation. I was giving this line to myself unconditionally. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long golden rectangles across my desk. I rose and walked to the living room where the piano sat silent in its corner. I ran my fingers over the keys. Middle C sounded as warm as tea. I pressed it again, then struck a simple chord, C major. A promise in music. The note resonated, filling the space with a gentle truth. I belonged here fully, not because I had given away my worth, but because I had reclaimed it. As dusk settled outside, I prepared myself a modest supper, sautéed vegetables, and a piece of grilled fish, eaten without an audience under the soft glow of the kitchen light. Each bite tasted like liberation, like the first meal after a long fast. No gratitude owed no invisible debts. Later, I sat by the window with a cup of herbal tea, watching the neighborhood settle into night. Houses glowed with the warmth of family gatherings, some lonelier than others. I hugged the mug to my chest, feeling the heat seep into my bones. My phone lay silent on the table next to me. I didn't need it to buzz with reminders of obligation. Instead, I felt my own heartbeat steady, resonant. I closed my eyes and listened to the hush, the echo of my choices. Decades of giving had unraveled into a new tapestry, one where I thread my own needs and worth into every stitch. And in that quiet moment, I realized that the most radical gift I could give was to myself the gift of equal measure of boundaries held with tenderness and of a heart free to receive as well as to give. I arrived at Mr. Altman's office on a crisp Monday morning, the late November air biting at my cheeks as I climbed the steps of the 2-story brick building. The green shutters framed the windows like a portrait, and the brass nameplate glinted in the pale sunlight. Altman and Reed, attorneys at law. My heart fluttered with anticipation and a hint of nervousness as I pushed open the carved oak door and stepped into the reception area where the faint scent of old paper and polished wood hung like a welcome. The receptionist, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile, greeted me by name. "Good morning, Mrs. Wexler. Mr. Altman will see you shortly." I nodded and took a seat in one of the plush chairs, eyes drifting to the photo on the wall of a younger Mr. Altman mustache, dark eyes bright, holding a bulldog in a Santa hat. Decades had passed since he'd handled my husband's will, but his reputation for precision and empathy was timeless. A soft chime signaled my turn, and the receptionist waved me into the inner office. The door closed behind me with a reassuring thud, and there he sat, Mr. Altman himself, in his high-back leather chair, reading over a stack of documents. His reading glasses perched low on his nose, and when he looked up, his ice-blue eyes met mine with that same steady kindness I remembered. "Irene," he said, rising to shake my hand, "it's been too long." His voice was gentle, familiar. "How can I help you today?" I settled into the leather guest chair and exhaled. It's time I began, voice firm. "I want to revise my will and establish a trust." I watched his brow lift slightly, and he gestured to the papers laid out on his desk. "Of course. Let's start with the will. What changes would you like?" I took a breath, momentarily reminded of the weight those documents carried, the power to shape lives beyond one's own. "I want Emma to be the sole beneficiary of my estate," I said. "And I want to remove Gregory and Meline entirely." Mr. Altman nodded thoughtfully, tapping his pen against a legal pad. "That's a significant revision. May I ask what led you to this decision?" His tone was curious but respectful, giving me the space to explain without prying. I told him succinctly about the airport and the diner and the motel, how I had waited in vain and then found clarity in solitude. I explained how each decades-long act of giving had become an unspoken expectation, how revoking those obligations had freed me. When I spoke of Emma, my voice softened. She's the one who still calls, who still asks nothing of me. Her kindness is the purest gift I know. I want her to inherit everything. Not because she needs it, but because she chose to be part of my life without conditions. Mr. Altman listened, pen poised. His expression never faltered, and when I finished, he said, "A testament to true family, Irene. I'll draft a new will, reflecting those wishes. Now, let's discuss the trust." He turned a page, and I leaned forward. "I want a revocable, living trust with Emma as the sole beneficiary and executor. I'd like to revoke Gregory's power of attorney too." A flicker of approval crossed his face as he scribbled notes. "Understood," he said. "We'll establish the trust so that you remain in full control during your lifetime, with distribution to Emma for education, health, housing, or emergencies as you see fit. I'll prepare the necessary documents. How soon would you like to sign?" I glanced at my watch. It was nearly noon. "As soon as possible," I replied. "Can we finish today?" He smiled a mix of pride and admiration. "Absolutely. Let's go line by line." He handed me the draft, will bound in a neat folder, and guided me through each paragraph. The language was precise: testatrix, bequests, residuary estate, but I focused on the meaning behind each clause. With every sentence, I approved a weight lifted from my shoulders. When we reached the section naming beneficiaries, his pen hovered. "So," he said, "no mention of Gregory or Meline?" I nodded. "No. Instead, all assets to Emma. I trust her judgment. She's been the truest part of my family." He underlined her name twice and signed a little check beside it. We moved on to revoking the power of attorney, and I watched him draw a definitive line through the previous designation of Gregory Wexler. "Your attorney, in fact, will be Emma, contingent upon your incapacity?" he asked gently. "Yes," I confirmed. "But only Emma. No alternate. I want it irrevocable once activated." His pen scratched a final note. "Very well. That ensures your wishes are honored without interference." By 1:00 p.m., we had completed the will. Mr. Altman slid it across the desk with a soft flourish. "Sign here, here, and here," he instructed, pointing to 3 signature lines. I took a deep breath and signed my name on each. The flourish of my pen across the page felt like a statement, a promise to myself more than anyone else. Beneath my signature, he dated the document and affixed his notary seal. Next came the trust document, a more intricate instrument, but he guided me through it patiently. We established Emma as trustee upon my death, or incapacity granted her the authority to manage the assets for my care first, then to use them for her benefit as needed. We inserted a clause allowing me to amend or revoke the trust during my lifetime, then specified that upon my passing, it would be irrevocable. I watched him mark the sections on medical expenses, educational costs, and emergency distributions, checking each box that resonated with my intentions. When the final page rustled into place, I signed again my full name, followed by Trustor. Mr. Altman sealed the document and handed it to me. "Everything is in order," he said. "We'll keep the originals here, and I'll send certified copies to your personal safe deposit box. Emma will receive a copy when she's of age or upon your request." I held the papers in my hands, feeling their weight. They weren't just legal instruments. They were the boundaries I'd drawn around my life, the legacy I chose to leave behind. "Thank you," I said, my voice quavering slightly. "Thank you for helping me find the words and the structure to assert my worth." He gave me a small, knowing smile. "You've done the hard work, Irene. I merely shaped your intentions into legal form." He rose and offered his hand again. "It's been an honor." I stood shaking his hand warmly. As I walked back through the reception area, papers tucked securely under my arm, I felt a new sense of agency pulsing through me. The lobby lights glinted off the frames on the wall, family photos of clients we'd helped find clarity in their own lives. Today, I had joined their ranks. Outside, the November sky had softened to a pale blue, and the wind carried a promise of winter's first snow. I tucked the documents into my purse, careful not to crease them, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The world around me moved with its usual rush cars, humming pedestrians, hurrying to lunch, but inside I felt an uncommon stillness. Every step toward my car was a step away from the old story of sacrifice and unmet expectations, and a step toward the story I would now author, one of respect, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that I belonged to myself and to the granddaughter who showed me the true face of love. That Saturday morning, the platform at Worcester Station was as familiar to me as my own front porch. A stretch of concrete flanked by faded benches and a single line of tracks glinting in the pale sunlight. I arrived early, clutching a paper bag I'd packed the night before, a ham and cheese sandwich wrapped in waxed paper, an apple nestled beside it, and a small thermos of peppermint tea I'd brewed just for the trip. My heart fluttered as I watched the digital display flicker from delayed to arriving and back again. For once, I didn't mind the wait. When the train finally lumbered into view, steel wheels sighing on the rails, my breath caught. Passengers stepped onto the platform with backpacks and rolling suitcases. A man in a sharp suit barked into his phone. A college student jogged off, earbuds in place. Then I saw her, Emma, bundled in a maroon hoodie, 2 sizes too large, dark curls escaping from beneath a woolen beanie. She paused at the door, scanning the crowd with that same keen gaze I remembered from her childhood, the one that always saw me first. She spotted me, and everything else fell away. Her face lit up with a radiant joy that erased years of disappointment and distance. She hurried forward, dropping her bag by my feet, and threw her arms around me. Her embrace was warm and fierce and real, no guilt, no rehearsed apologies, just 2 generations reconnecting in a single heartbeat. I held her tight, breathing in her familiar scent of mint shampoo and clean laundry, feeling every thread of my heart stitched back together. We pulled apart, and she grinned, eyes shining. "Grandma," she breathed, as if that word carried the weight of worlds. "I missed you so much." I smiled back, my own eyes misting. "I missed you more, baby." Her hand slipped into mine, tiny alongside my own, and we started walking toward the parking lot without a word. The morning air was crisp, and our breaths puffed like steam as we caught up on the months since we'd last spoken, her classes, my travels, the everyday details that had once seemed so mundane, but now felt precious. At home, I swung open the front door and ushered her inside. She dropped her bag by the foyer bench and took in the lavender-scented air, the faded quilt draped over the wicker chair, the piano's silent keys gathered in dust. "It's exactly the same," she whispered, as though I'd paused time for her. I nodded. I wouldn't change a thing. She laughed, that bright laugh I'd heard on FaceTime, and flopped onto the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "I'm starving," she said, voice muffled. I rummaged through the bag and produced the sandwich and apple. "I packed you lunch," I explained, handing her the thermos. She peeled off the paper and tore into the sandwich, eyes closing as she tasted ham and cheese on fresh bread. "Grandma," she sighed in contentment, "this is perfect." I sat beside her and sipped my tea, grateful for the simple ritual of nourishing one another. We drifted to the kitchen, where I set out a bowl of penne pasta, sautéed spinach, garlic, and olive oil on the stove. Emma took over the grater, spiraling Parmesan snow over each generous heap of pasta. We moved in tandem, voices low, unhurried, as if each movement were a dance step practiced 1,000 times. Her laughter echoed in the small kitchen when I dropped a clump of garlic on the floor and we both stooped to retrieve it. In that moment, life felt uncomplicated and full. Dinner was served at the kitchen table, the poinsettia from last week still bright in its pot. We ate slowly. Between bites, she told me about her new clinical rotation, and I told her how I'd reorganized the house since we'd last been together. No side glances at phones, no half-listened anecdotes, just presence. Every so often, I'd catch her eye and nod, letting her know that her stories mattered, that her voice filled the room. After dinner, I retrieved the old chessboard from the shelf, its pieces carved with care edges worn smooth by years of play. I set it on the coffee table in the living room and invited her to sit across from me. "Your move," I said, picking up the white pawn. Her grin turned mischievous. "You're on," she replied, placing her knight. The game unfolded like a silent conversation, each move thoughtful. Each piece captured a testament to strategy and patience. When she finally checkmated me, I bowed my head, defeated and delighted. "You're better than I remember," I admitted, ruffling her hair. We lingered over the board long after the pieces came to rest. The fire flickered in the hearth, and the house settled into its evening rhythm, the radiator's gentle clank, the hum of the clock on the mantel. She leaned back on the couch, stretching, and I joined her. "Grandma," she said softly, "thank you for letting me come." I smiled, warmth spreading through me. "Thank you for coming." The simple gratitude between us felt like a balm, erasing old hurts and unspoken tensions with its sincerity. Later, as she headed to the guest room to unpack, I followed her down the hall. She pulled a photograph from her tote, a candid shot of us baking cookies last Christmas. "Can we hang this back up?" she asked, eyes hopeful. "Absolutely," I said, taking the frame from her hands. "It belongs right here." We found the perfect spot on the wall where sunlight streamed in each afternoon and hung it so our faces shone together. In that image, I saw not the grandmother who had given too much or felt too little, but the woman who had rediscovered her voice through the love of her granddaughter. That night, I sat by her door and listened to the faint sounds of her settling in zipper, closing on her suitcase, the soft click of the bedside lamp, the hum of her phone's silent alarm. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. No more waiting at gates, no more second-guessing my worth. Here in the glow of that photograph and the comfort of her presence, I was fully seen. As I turned off the hall light and slipped back to my own room, I carried with me the echoes of her laughter, the warmth of her hug, and the clear joy of being wanted for exactly who I am. In Emma's arrival, I found renewal a reminder that belonging begins with being present, and that sometimes the sweetest homecomings happen not on doorsteps or gates, but across a simple kitchen table and a well-worn chessboard. That afternoon, I heard a soft knock at the front door, 3 hesitant raps that carried more plea than greeting. My heart sank a little as I set down the stack of folded towels I'd been sorting. The knock came again, a little firmer this time, and I paused by the entryway mirror, smoothing down the front of my navy cardigan. I wasn't sure I wanted to see Meline, but I told myself I owed her this courtesy. She was, after all, the mother of my grandchildren and the woman who'd once sent heart emoji texts promising that we want you here for Thanksgiving. The door swung open before I reached it. There she stood in heels, too narrow for our sidewalk, and a blouse the color of autumn leaves, her hair perfectly styled, as though she'd stepped off an ad for a hair care brand. Her perfume wafted in something floral and confident, and I wondered how many times she'd spritzed it today, each spray a layer of armor against the awkwardness ahead. "Mom," she began, her voice sweet, edged with rehearsed sorrow. "I just wanted to talk. I know how hurt you must feel." She managed a small apologetic smile that faltered in the corners. "There was a misunderstanding about your flight. Greg told me it was tomorrow, not today. And the photo, it wasn't meant to exclude you. It was just a holiday post. You know, I'm so sorry." I stepped aside and motioned for her to come in. The foyer felt too bright, the wood floors too bare. "Meline," I said, my voice calm, not cold, but steady like a lake at dawn. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." I pointed to the living room where the couch was draped with the quilt Emma and I had just hung back on the wall. The photograph of Emma as an infant snug in my arms stood on the mantel, its corners lit by the late afternoon sun. Meline hesitated at the threshold before walking in, glancing at the mantel picture with a polite nod. She sank into the center cushion, smoothing her skirt with a delicate hand. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of all the unspoken conversations that had come before this one. "I really am sorry," she began again. "We thought you knew the dinner was yesterday. The change was last minute and I should have called you. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her words tumbled out like hurried gifts, each apology wrapped in another. I watched her straighten her posture braces of contrition and urgency in her eyes. I could almost see the script she'd rehearsed: remorse, promise to do better, plea for forgiveness. But I had rewritten that script for myself already. "Meline," I said, and my voice rang with an unexpected clarity, "this isn't just about yesterday's dinner or that photo." I paused, giving her a moment to absorb the truth in my tone. "I'm simply finished filling the silence of your neglect." Her expression flickered surprise, then hurt, then defensiveness, all in a breath. "Neglect?" she asked, her voice small. "That's harsh." "It's honest," I replied. "I spent years showing up baking pies, covering emergencies, answering last-minute requests. I was your safety net, your backup plan, your obligation. But you never saw me. You saw what I could give you. You filled your gratitude with demands, and I filled my life's work around those demands." I leaned forward, letting the words settle between us. "I'm no longer the one to fill your silences with my presence. Your apologies, now perfumed as they are too late." She blinked, lips parting as though searching for a response. Instead, she breathed in and tried again. "I understand you're upset," she said, "but do you really think cutting me out is the answer? We love you. We want things to be like before." I felt a flash of the old me, the one who would have softened, who would have reassured her. But I didn't. I folded my hands more tightly in my lap. "No," I said firmly. "I want things to be different. I don't want like before. Before I waited in airports. Before I answered your call seconds after they came in. Before I forgave your excuses when you forgot my birthday or left me standing at a curb. That person is gone." Her shoulders slumped, her carefully arranged composure fracturing. She began, but I cut in gently. "You don't get to just anything I said. You made choices. You chose not to remember me. You chose to post your happy family without space for me. That choice said more than any broken text or missed call ever could." I watched tears well in her eyes. "I'm not angry," I added softly. "I'm not bitter. I'm simply done." She looked away as though ashamed. I rose slowly from my seat and crossed to the window, watching gray light pool against the pane. The silence stretched on until I heard her stand behind me. I didn't turn. "Mom," she said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry you feel this way." The words hung in the air, apology with no ownership. I took a steadying breath. "I'm not here to mend this for you," I said. "I'm here to tell you that your apologies won't change what I've learned. They won't undo the years I rearranged my life to be available at your convenience. They won't place me at your table if you never make room." I felt the cool glass of the window under my palm and let its stillness anchor me. She cleared her throat. "I brought turkey sandwiches," she offered weakly, pulling a paper bag from her tote. "In case you were hungry later." The attempt at kindness felt hollow, like dropping pennies into a well you'd never draw from. I turned to face her at last. "Thank you," I said, voice measured. "But I've eaten. I found my own way to the table." She swallowed her gaze, flicking between my face and the paper bag. After a long moment, she nodded and set the bag on the coffee table. "I see," she whispered. I'm sorry." The finality in her tone told me she understood at last this visit would not rescue her from her own choices. I stepped back, moved to the door, and opened it. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of late fall leaves. "Goodbye, Meline," I said. "Take care." My words weren't cruel. They were an offering of closure. She stood awkwardly, cardigan rustling against the arm of the couch. Then she turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking once, twice before the quiet swallowed her footsteps. I closed the door gently behind her, the latch clicking into place like a seal on old chapters. In the hush that followed, I leaned against the door for a moment, feeling the warmth of the house press behind me. No rescue had come. No rescue was coming. But in that realization, I found a freedom I had never known when I waited for empty promises. I returned to the living room, the photograph of Emma and me smiling down from the mantel, and I whispered to its reflection, I am not spare. I am not extra. Then I turned away, the weight of others' expectations lifted, and stepped into the quiet I had earned. When my phone buzzed again that evening, I saw Greg's name lighting up the screen, his voicemail, and 2 frantic texts waiting for me. I stared at them for a long moment, the words leaping out at me, Mom, please call me. I don't know what's wrong. We're worried. But I felt no pull to answer. Instead, I slipped the phone into my purse and turned my back on the unanswered pleas that had once sent me rushing to airports and driveways. Tonight, the only call I'd return was to myself. I moved through the living room in bare feet, the wooden floor cool underfoot. I reached for a thick pillar candle I'd bought after my diner meal when the scent of pumpkin pie and tea still lingered in my senses. I set it in a ceramic holder on the dining table and struck a match. The flame caught quickly, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. I breathed in the warm, vanilla-spiced aroma and let it anchor me to the present. In the kitchen, I filled a wine glass halfway with the bottle I'd been saving, an old favorite with berry notes and a silky finish. No one else would taste it tonight. I lifted the glass, watching the burgundy liquid swirl as I inhaled its bouquet. The weight of the glass in my hand felt comforting, a tangible reminder that I could pour for myself just as freely as I once poured for family gatherings. I set a simple wooden placemat on the table, no tablecloth, no linens, just the smooth grain of oak beneath my plate. I chose a shallow bowl from the cabinet and ladled in a thick tomato bisque I'd made earlier, its surface rippling under stray crumbs of basil. A slice of toasted sourdough sat on a small plate beside it, butter melting into golden pools. I arranged the bowl and plate neatly in front of the candle and took my seat as if it were a cathedral altar. No second helpings required. This offering was complete in itself. I lifted my fork and dipped it into the soup, the rich tang of tomato filling my mouth. I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth as it spread from my tongue down to my belly. In that silence, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional crackle from the candle wick, I felt more present than I had at any family feast. No chatter, no clinking silverware, demanding attention, no anxious glances at a phone hopeful for invitations or excuses. Just me, my meal, and the steady glow of the flame. I paused between bites to take a sip of wine. The tart sweetness, blackberry and cherry with a hint of oak, traveled smoothly down my throat. I let the silence fill the spaces between flavors, offering a deep, unspoken permission to simply be. At that moment, I realized I had forgotten what it was like to eat without expectation, to taste without performing joy for someone else, to sit at a table that welcomed my presence without condition. My phone buzzed again, the screen lit up with Greg's worried face in a missed video call. I looked at it for a moment, then set it face down on the table, choosing not to interrupt the fragile peace I'd created. The candle's flame flickered, and I traced its glow with my eyes, as though studying a small sun. I thought of the times I'd rushed home from work to plate roast chicken, the times I'd waited up late for stragglers at family reunions. Tonight, there was no schedule to keep no one counting on me to make the evening complete. I was complete. I finished the last spoonful of soup and placed the bowl gently at the center of the placemat. The wine glass was half empty now, but I refilled it, savoring the ritual of pouring. I swirled the liquid, watching its legs trace slow paths down the glass and raised it in a silent toast to my own resilience. To me, I thought for learning that my company is enough. I tasted the wine again, noticing subtleties I'd missed before. After dinner, I stood and gathered my plate and glass, carrying them to the sink. I washed them by hand, the warm water soothing my fingertips. Each motion, rinsing, soaping, drying, felt deliberate, a meditation in movement. I placed the clean dishes back on the rack and turned off the faucet, letting the last drip echo in the quiet room. The house felt cocooned in darkness. Beyond the candle, every corner shaded, but for that one bright flame. I returned to the table and sat down, drawing my knees beneath me and wrapping my arms around my legs. I watched the candle's glow reflect in the polished wood lengths of light and shadow, tracing patterns I found unexpectedly comforting. The phone lay silent on the placemat, its screen dark. I felt no urge to check it, not tonight. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened the soft click of the clock's second hand, the distant hum of traffic outside the rhythm of my own breath. It was a quiet symphony I could finally appreciate. Memories drifted to moments past birthdays I spent baking cakes I never tasted, holidays I hosted while longing for a word of genuine welcome. I thought of the years of waiting in gates and doorways, the rituals of arrival and departure that had become my routine. And I saw the contrast now in this stillness. No gate, no door, just a table set for my own arrival into self-acceptance. I opened my eyes when the candle's flame danced low as if bidding me to hold this moment longer. I tilted my head back, resting it against the chair's high slats, and closed my eyes again. In the darkness behind my lids, I saw my reflection, older perhaps, but at peace. Not diminished by others' neglect, not diminished by their regrets. Whole, thriving in the space I had claimed. I wondered what Greg's texts had said by now, pleased to come home promises to make it up confusion poured into digital words. But I felt no compulsion to respond. My silence was a statement stronger than any words I could type. It said, "My silence has value. My seat is my own." And in that silent assertion, I felt an unexpected joy when I realized I'd been chasing all along. With a final sip of wine, I set the glass down and reached for the last log I'd saved beside the fireplace. I placed it gently among the embers, watching it catch flame and settle into glowing warmth. The fire flickered alive, casting a soft heat through the room. I curled my legs beneath me on the couch and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, leaning into its radiance. In the amber light, I let the quiet affirm me. No longer a guest at someone else's table, no longer filling the spaces of their neglect. I was both host and honored guest at this feast of self-celebration. The candlelight, the wine, the soup, the fire, they formed a circle of intention around me, a sanctuary I'd built with my own hands. And as the night deepened, I whispered to the shadows, "I'm here. I'm still here." The words felt alive on my tongue, carrying a power I'd once surrendered to others. But now in the hush of my own choosing, they rang true. I was complete, not because someone invited me, but because I invited myself to claim this space, this moment, this life. When I finally rose to extinguish the candle, I did so with a gentle smile. A single breath, a flick of the wick, and the flame wavered out. The darkness settled around me like a gift. I carried the emptied wine glass back to the kitchen and tucked it gently beside the sink, evidence of an evening spent nourishing myself, body and soul. No second helpings, required no rescues necessary. In the quiet I had found my fullness, and that I knew was the greatest feast of all. The first frost of December had glazed my porch railings when I fetched the box of holiday decorations from the garage. Inside, I found the wreath frame I'd bought last year, but never hung the one I'd picked because it was simple, a circle of pine sprigs and holly berries, no oversized bows or gaudy ornaments. I carried it to the front steps and set down the box, the morning light slipping through bare branches above, casting delicate shadows across my doorstep. I tied the wreath to the door with a length of natural twine, looping it twice for security. The holly berries flashed bright against the deep green of the pine like laughter splashed across a quiet face. I stood back and ran my fingers along the rough burlap ribbon, feeling the texture beneath my fingertips, anchoring me to this moment. A ritual created solely for myself. No one else's opinion would shape this wreath. It was my welcome home. Inside, I switched on the old radio in the living room, the one perched on a side table by the window. Its warm glow flickered as it warmed up, and soon the gentle swell of slow jazz, soft trumpet, and brushed snare filled the air. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, its steam curling toward the ceiling, and carried the mug into the kitchen, setting it on the counter beside the bowl of tangerines I'd arranged that morning. The sweetness of citrus mingled with the floral notes of the tea, a harmony made for quiet reflection. I rummaged through a drawer to find the string of tiny white lights I'd purchased at an after-Christmas sale. They were modest, no multicolored extravagance, just soft, warm bulbs on a green wire that would blend with my wreath's foliage. I draped them along the porch railing, weaving the strand through spindles until the light sat like scattered fireflies against the dark wood. Plugged in, they glowed gently, a ribbon of light that whispered reassurance into the night. As dusk settled, I stepped onto the porch with my tea, wrapping my cardigan tighter against the chill. I sipped slowly, listening to the jazz swing through the rooms and out into the yard. My eyes traced the glow of the wreath and the railing lights, and I realized I'd created a small sanctuary, my own beacon against winter's gray. I inhaled, tasting the honeyed warmth of the tea, and felt something inside me soften. Later, I returned to the kitchen to tackle my evening chores. I pulled down the cleaning supplies from the cabinet, set them on the counter, and paused. There, beside the spray bottles and microfiber cloths, I placed a notepad and a pen. I had been thinking about my boundaries, how I'd learned to say no to protect my time and my peace. Now I wanted to solidify that learning in words. I tilted my head to the side pen, hovering, and wrote at the top of the page, things I no longer owe. Underneath, I listed each quietly one by one. I no longer owe explanations for my choices. I no longer owe last-minute dinners. I no longer owe my presence to those who forget me. I no longer owe compliance with guilt or obligation. I no longer owe silence about my own worth. As I penned each line, the words crystallized the lessons I'd lived these past weeks. My hand moved steadily, and by the time I set the pen down, the list glowed with the clarity of someone claiming her own story. I tucked the notepad beside the cleaning supplies, an altar of intention among bleach and sponges. That night, I opened the cabinet again and found space on the inside of the door's panel. With a strip of painter's tape, I fixed a small index card bearing 3 simple words in my neat script, "I'm still here." It felt almost tender, like a promise to myself first and foremost. Each day that I opened that cabinet for supplies, I would see those words, a reminder that my worth was not contingent on anyone else's acknowledgement. I returned to the living room and sank into my armchair, tea in hand. Through the window, the porch lights twinkled gently against the dark sky, as if greeting me personally. In the background, the jazz trio slipped into a ballad, the piano keys resonating with a slow, comforting timbre. I closed my eyes and let the music and the soft glow envelop me, drawing the day's edges in and smoothing away any lingering regrets. Memories fluttered through my mind of past holidays spent orchestrating family gatherings, of the silent plate left empty at the table, of the last-minute calls I'd answered in the middle of the night. I felt a compassionate sadness for that version of myself, the one who conflated sacrifice with love. But I also felt pride for how far I'd come from waiting at gates to making my own porch lights shine. From clicking book flight in hopeful anticipation to crafting a wreath that welcomed only me. The radio's volume dipped, and I reached a hand to follow the station dial to a news brief, just a momentary check on the world outside. But I stayed on the jazz station, letting the music carry me instead. No headlines, no notifications,
just notes of melody that curved around my heart. The clock ticked toward midnight, and I felt a hush settle in every corner of the house. I finished my tea, its warmth now a gentle glow in my belly. I stood and walked to the window, gazing at the multicolored porch lights shining like distant constellations in my own little sky. I raised a hand in a silent toast to my own presence, to the rituals that had claimed this home as mine. Then I padded to the bedroom to prepare for sleep. I folded my clothes, nothing extravagant, placed them neatly in drawers, and set my alarm by the bedside clock. Before slipping under the covers, I held my phone for a moment, considering the messages that waited unanswered. But I set it aside face down on the nightstand and picked up the notepad instead. I underlined, "Things I no longer owe," then flipped to a fresh page and wrote one final line: "I owe myself kindness every day."
Satisfied, I placed the pad beside the card taped inside the cabinet door and turned off the lamp. The jazz drifted softer, a lullaby from the living room radio. I closed my eyes and let the day's gentle victories drift through me, the wreath on the door, the lights on the porch, the list at the cabinet, the card of affirmation. In the dark, I felt the glow of those small rituals warming me from within. No invitation needed, this sanctuary was mine by right. And as I drifted into sleep, I carried with me the quiet knowledge that I was present, that I mattered, and that I had crafted this world of self-care so that I would never again doubt my own worth. The hum of the engines was a gentle reminder that I was moving forward, quite literally, away from everything that had held me hostage in expectations. When I stepped onto the plane, I paused at row 14 and saw the window seat beside mine still open. The armrest was unlocked, the upholstery smooth and inviting. I set my carry-on in the overhead bin, then settled into 14A with a deliberate slowness. The empty seat beside me felt like an unspoken promise. I draped my coat across 14B, letting its soft navy wool spill into the space I'd once feared would be denied me. No coat check, no folded jacket tossed to one side, just room enough for air to circulate around me, enough to remind me that I was entitled to comfort. I leaned back and exhaled, my shoulders dropping as if the day's tension had been lodged there all along. The flight attendant offered a gentle smile as she passed her clipboard clasped under one arm. "Heading home or heading out?" she asked, quietly placing a cup of water on my tray table. I met her gaze. "Both," I said, and her nod held no judgment, only understanding. The plane taxied, then lifted with that familiar jolt of ascent. I pressed my hand to the cool glass, watching the patchwork of runway lights fade into midnight black. Each blinking light became a star twinkling in my private sky, and I thought of the porch wreath I'd hung, its own tiny bulbs glowing against winter's early dusk. I thought of the jazz drifting through this same house, the wreath's simple circle reprising in the round of the moon above. I reached into my bag and pulled out a slender notebook, the one where I'd written, "I am not spare. I am not extra." I flipped to the last page, where I'd taped a small index card, "I'm still here." The card had journeyed with me from the cabinet door beneath my sink to the nightstand in the motel room to this seat high above the earth. I ran my finger over the words, tracing lyrics of self-recognition I'd learned too late. A soft click announced the seatbelt sign turning off. Passengers loosened lap belts. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. I unclipped mine and stretched my legs, the extra space gifted when no one claimed the aisle seat. I crossed and uncrossed my ankles, feeling the miles between me and the curb where I'd once waited for someone to remember I existed. The air I breathed now tasted free, unburdened by guilt or duty. I reached into my coat pocket and withdrew a small tin, the last slice of pumpkin pie from Tina's diner, wrapped in wax paper. I cracked it open and offered a bite to no one but myself. The crust was still warm, its buttery flakiness melting on my tongue. The spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, clove wafted through my senses. I closed my eyes, savoring each morsel, and for the first time I tasted no regret. It was pure sweetness, a celebration of my own right to pleasure. Below me, the city lights flickered like the holiday decorations I'd strung across my porch. Above me, the sky was an ink-black canvas, punctuated only by distant stars. I thought of Emma's arrival, the way her laughter had filled rooms, and of the photograph we'd rehung her infant smile, still radiant in the winter light. I felt her presence beside me now, though she slept at home dreaming of nursing school and cornbread stuffing. My phone buzzed once, a text from Greg, "Please call me." My thumb hovered over the screen, but I let the message lie. Silence could be more potent than any apology I might offer. Besides, I didn't owe anyone that call. I'd given enough of myself to fill 1,000 miles of absent hellos and half-hearted invites. The flight attendant reappeared with the beverage cart, her trolley rattling softly. Coffee or tea, she offered. I chose tea, imagining the ritual of brewing over the kettle at home as sunlight filtered through my kitchen window. She poured steaming water into a paper cup and handed it to me. I clutched the cup's warmth, setting it between my palms, and felt comfort spread inward. This moment was mine alone. I watched the horizon begin to lighten, a thin band of pale pink unfurling into soft gold. The sky above and below the wing shimmered with dawn's first glow. I leaned forward, elbows resting on the tray table, and whispered to the view, "Thank you. Thank you for showing me that a seat at the table isn't granted by someone else's invitation. It's held when I claim it for myself." Memories of Thanksgiving tables drifted through my mind, the ones where I played hostess cutting turkey roast after roast, polishing silver until it gleamed, tucking napkins just so I remembered the empty chair. The unspoken apology in every delayed hug, the hollow ache of family gatherings where my presence felt optional. Those memories felt distant now, like fading photographs. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a single photograph, me and Emma by the fireplace. Her curls wild, my cardigan cozy, both of us smiling without reservation. I pressed it against the window, aligning it with the rising sun, and felt gratitude for the bond that had shown me where I truly belonged. The engine's drone lulled me into a gentle reverie. My thoughts softened, unspooling the stories I'd lived these past days. The airport bench where I chose to walk away, the diner booth where I discovered solitude could taste like belonging. The motel room where I wrote, "I am not extra," the bank, where I drew financial lines. I'd never crossed before the attorney's office where I rewrote my will. Emma's train station hug. Milline's hollow apologies, the solo feast of soup and wine, and the wreath lit under the winter sky. Each chapter had led me here to a seat with room around me, to air I could claim to a table set for one but filled with self-respect. I sipped my tea as the flight began its final descent. The city spread beneath me like a glittering quilt, streets glimmering with holiday lights, rooftops dusted in sparkling frost. I felt connected to every home, every hearth waiting for its own gathering, and yet I belonged most profoundly to the sanctuary I'd built inside myself. The plane touched down with a smooth whisper. I felt the shift in gravity, the gentle jolt of wheels on tarmac. I straightened, folded my coat, and left the window seat empty for someone else to fill someday if they chose to seek space for me. For now, I carried its absence like a gift, a reminder that freedom often arrives on an empty chair. At the gate, as passengers gathered their bags, I lingered in my seat, breathing deeply. I looped my arms around my legs, chest tightening with warmth. When I finally rose, I took the photo of Emma and me from the window and tucked it into my coat pocket, my personal talisman for the journey ahead. Walking down the aisle, I whispered a final thank you to the flight attendant, who smiled at me with genuine kindness. "Welcome back," she said softly as I stepped onto the jet bridge. I nodded, feeling whole. Arrival no longer meant waiting. It meant returning to myself. In the terminal, I paused beneath the arrival sign, not to wait, but to orient myself. I turned east toward home, the photograph in my pocket pressed gently against my chest. Outside, the morning air tasted fresh and open, full of promise. I rolled my suitcase forward, imprinting new footsteps onto familiar floors. When I walk through my front door later, I'll feel the lavender scent of my house welcome me as warmly as any family hug. Inside the wreath, lights will twinkle under the porch window, and the radio will await with another morning's slow jazz. I'll open the cabinet door and smile at the card, "I'm still here." And I'll know, without doubt, that my seat at every table, my own table, the family's wherever I choose, remains mine to keep always. Because freedom, I've learned, is not found in another's invitation, but in the courage to claim space for yourself and to taste your own pumpkin pie in solitude, knowing that true belonging begins with coming home to who you really are.